What message would the Apostle Paul deliver to a 21st century American audience if he were alive today?
The author has written,
an open letter about creation and life. By trusting God. In the miracle of new life.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Nick, and welcome to my podcast. The name of the podcast is Dr. Nick, the Apostle Paul's Messenger. And I'll explain a little bit as we go along as to why I picked that title. But, one of the things I want to do in this podcast is bring across a vision of St. Paul living in our time. And how would he address some of the problems that we face, the moral problems that we face in today's culture? So as part of this, I'm going to have question and answer periods. You can ask me questions. I'll try to respond as best I can. In doing that, feel free. We're all friends. A lot of you I already know. So some of my relationships with you need to be renewed, but we're here together and let's take our walk with the Lord in the 21st century. And how would St. Paul, who was the evangelist par excellence in the early church, how would he address some of the issues we have today? So feel free during all this to call me Dr. Nick. Okay, I'm a man on a godly mission. And I have always been on a godly mission. I can remember since I was 10 years old, some of the things about helping God and being more part of his life and serving him and so forth. I want to continue to do that. And I really have to mention, though, that my success and my ability to do all this really is because I have a great wife who's a holy lady, and she keeps me very focused when I kind of move into worry or confusion or anxiety or, how can I address this certain problem and so forth. She's always there trusting in God. And that's something I've had to learn my whole life. But it's a great lesson to learn, by the way. Together, me and Camille have been blessed with 4 great children. And they all are married. They have fabulous spouses. And we have 4 great grandchildren. So let me tell you a little bit more about myself and my training. I have a PhD from Seton Hall University in educational leadership, and my whole motive is to teach, to lead people, and to educate people through many of the twists and turns that we all experience in everyday life. And much more so here in today's culture where there's confusion everywhere. Unfortunately, we're faced with constant conflicts, confusion, and information. We're an information age. We're technology that gives us everything we need to know and more, sometimes even more. But what's lacking sometimes is divine truths. And this is especially true in the area that I really specialize in the most and really devote most of my time to, and that's the pro-life messages. I'm very involved in the pro-life movement, and so is my wife, Camille. Those messages are frequently distorted. And we're going to have a podcast one day on some of the lies and distortions about justifying abortion and how that doesn't really serve where we're going as a people, as a Christian people, and as a nation, a culture of Americans. Okay. So I see my role as really bringing forth truth, clarity, and faith. This is who I am. I like to be honest about what I see. I like to be clear about it. And I like to focus in on how God is the source and the driving force here. In addition to my doctorate, I hold 2 master's degrees. one in sociology, and I received that from Montclair State University in my early days after I got out of college. Spent a few years working, and then I went on and got a master's degree. And then I have a master's degree in theology from Seton Hall University, the Immaculate Conception Seminary School of Theology. So what I try to do is to bring these three major academic disciplines into and weave them together in my messages. So I'll be talking basically in an educational way, in a leadership way, but on issues that are theological and sociological. That relate to our issues that relate to our culture. So I'd like to start by sharing the purpose of these podcasts. I said I mentioned that I'm presenting myself as a messenger of Paul, in the Apostle Paul in the 21st century. So let me give you a little background. In 2020, I published a book, which I'm very happy about. The name of the book is Letter of Paul to the Americans, Creation in a Culture of Life for 21st Century America. You might ask yourself, well, why did I write that? Well, as I just explained, there's, I guess the central issue of the book is, if Paul were alive today, what message would he be delivering to a 21st century America? Now, I happen in my theological studies really enjoy St. Paul. There's something about his personality, there's something about his way of life, with something about his experiences, and we'll talk a lot about Paul specifically in the second episode. All right. Today's episode is just an introduction to the message I really want to bring, and then we'll get into specifics as we move along here. But within that, if you haven't read it, by the way, people have told me, I've read your book and it's absolutely great. I mean, I'm not trying to be proud about that. I mean, I am proud about it, but I'm not trying to be boastful about it. The point is that I used to pray. I would pray before I even started a new chapter. What is the name of the chapter? What are we going to be talking about? I ask God for guidance, and I look back now and I read that book over and over again, and I say, that's not me. That is not me. That is God speaking. All right. So he just took over. So that's, one of my experiences. But so it's available, by the way, in case you're interested. All right. It's available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and on my website, which is paultotherescue.com. It's all one word, paultotherescue.com. I'll explain a little bit about that rescue word later on as well. But I'm confident that the Apostle Paul wants to convey a compelling message to the 21st century. And that message, the core of it, and I'll be repeating this constantly, is the sanctity and dignity of the human person. I fully believe that if we really comprehend what the sanctity and dignity of the human person is, and I'm going to be speaking about creation. Why did God create us? Why are we here? What's the purpose of life? How can we sanctify ourselves? How can we journey to an everlasting happiness? So this is a message that is very, very seldom heard in the popular culture, okay, about the sanctity. If we really understood the sanctity and dignity, we wouldn't be murdering people. We wouldn't be abusing people. We wouldn't be trafficking people. We wouldn't be doing and trafficking drugs and sex, and we wouldn't be aborting children in the womb. We wouldn't be suggesting that people who are not functioning at the end of life, that they have doctor-assisted suicide. We're not going to talk about the death penalty or anything that involves not respecting the sanctity and dignity of the human person is going to be the subject matter here. It's going to be the core of what we're doing here. I also believe that I'm a man of the Holy Spirit, and I've been experiencing the power of the Holy Spirit in my life and in my marriage, by the way, because God has really directed us in that area. I really believe God also wants, in this 21st century, especially in America, where we are de-Christianized, and we have really put our Christian identity on the shelf. It's not the way I grew up. I grew up in the 1950s, and I can honestly say that we're nowhere even near where that mindset was. And I'm sure a lot of the older people would know that and really understand it and appreciate it as well. But I believe that Holy Spirit really needs to revitalize. That means bring life back to a way where we can really understand human nature and its sanctity and its dignity in a way where we don't want to hurt anyone. We don't want to abuse anyone, anywhere they're at, including where we can't see them, but we can feel them, and that's in the womb. All right. Every podcast that I do is an action message. Okay. It's just not information. What I want to do is I want to bring us from understanding more about what we're dealing with, but to act on it. You can't just learn stuff and then say, okay, well, that's nice, and then move on to something else, especially when it comes to a serious issue like life and human life. And we're getting deeper and deeper into, it's almost a comfort zone. We don't really address the issue sharply enough. And that's something I also am going to talk about today, is that why that's not happening and where it's not happening. I will be very clear and I don't want to use the word loud because I don't want you to think I'm screaming, but very clear and vocal about this issue. Okay. And I will present undisputed facts. I'm not going to talk about what I think is the right thing. I'm not going to force my opinion on you. I'm going to speak to you about facts. So one of the things that I could think of, a couple things. I want to speak about the whole area of, some people say, well, human life doesn't begin at conception. It begins when you're born. Okay. There are scientific facts that I'm going to present that really supports another way of thinking. And I think the more people understand the true facts, the better. Some people say that there's nothing in the Bible that condemns abortion. Well, in fact, there's a lot in the Bible that condemns abortion. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the facts. And if you're willing and able to want to hear the facts, then we'll move on to that. You know, that's some of the things I want to do. But like I said, everything that I present is going to be in the context of learning. It's going to stem from theological and sociological and cultural issues. When I talk about human life, let me just give the framework. I see human life from the point of reproductive fertilization to the point of natural death and everywhere in between. I mentioned some of the things, the abuses that go on in society, like trafficking women and drugs and violence and crime and so forth, everything in between, how we address children that have deformities, that have challenges. All these things, if we appreciate the sanctity and dignity of the human person, we would be able to address these things the way they really should be addressed. Now, let me say a word about natural death. When I say natural death, I'm referring to the administration of hydration, nutrition, and ventilation to the point of natural death, willed by God, divinely willed by God. God determines when our last breath will be breathed. Okay? Not judges, not doctors, and not lawyers. God created us for a reason, for a purpose. We're going to talk all about that sometime as well, because this is a big, big subject. You really got to understand that if you want to appreciate what it is to be a human person and the great opportunity we have to be human. And what God has done, He has raised humanity to a higher standard. I can't wait to get into the other podcast, okay, already. Now, the word rescue, I told you before I was going to address the whole issue of rescue. And in the Bible, well, what I did a search, how many times is the word rescue used? And the answer I got was, well, there's 400 times in the Bible when the word rescue is used, or something that refers closely to the act of rescuing. All right. I happen to think there's probably much more than that, but because I asked about the word rescue, I got 400. Okay. That's the whole this message of what Paul's really talking about. We'll get at this into the second episode, is how we've been rescued from the bondage of sin that we've been locked into the point where Jesus died for us and saved us on the cross. Okay, going to get into that more, but that's the idea of rescue. And what Paul wants to do now in the 21st century, he wants to rescue our culture, just like he wanted the Gentile community to be rescued from their pagan way of thinking to a Christ-centered way of thinking. Okay, he brought them from one point to the next. He wants to bring our culture from the culture of, I'll use the word, culture of death to a culture of life. If we can transition from that, we will be a better people. We will be a better nation. We will be a better, more respectful people as well. I'm inviting you to this journey. I hope you accept it. But like I said, you won't hear this message anywhere else. First of all, you're not going to hear it in corporate boardrooms. Okay, I have a list, and I'm not going to bring it out now, but I have a list of corporations that support and give money to and advocate for abortion. I can't figure out why a business in this world where the whole idea of abortion is a very divisive subject, why a corporation that seeks to sell to everybody and to make money would make itself supporter of abortion. Why would they do that? Stay away from it. But that's not what happens. Okay, so you're not going to hear this. You're definitely not going to hear it in the social media or in the news stations. Okay, because they basically perpetuate these distortions and these lies, and that's really a shame. But that has to be dealt with by the journalistic community. There's nothing that I can do about it other than make it more emphatic. Okay. The other place that you're not going to hear it, you'll hear some of it though. Let me modify that. You'll hear some of it, but you're not going to hear it in our churches. That is serious. You have to ask yourself, why wouldn't the message of protecting human life be heard more consistently from the pulpit? Look at how many times the minister or the priest gives a sermon, gives a talk, gives an exhortation. And what do? How many times you hear this, that we don't respect human life, the sanctity and dignity, not just human life, but drive in on the real core issue is that it's sanctified and dignified because it was created by God. And it was willed by God. And its continuation is in the plan of God. And there's a reason for God's plan. And you're part of God's plan, a unique part of God's plan. Well, when we talk about the science of reproduction, one of the things I'm going to mention, and I'll give you a little hint right now, how unique each of us are. At the point of fertilization, our DNA is determined at that point. Okay? And the color of our hair, the color of our eyes, all the stuff about us is right in that DNA at that point, at that explosive point of fertilization. And so to say that, you're not a human being until you're born, but who you are today as an adult started at that very point, fertilization, on that DNA. And that DNA is absolutely 100% unique to you. It's not your parents' DNA. It's not your grandparents. That it might be part of it, but you are uniquely who you are, and no one else can have all of the DNA that you have in its qualities and characteristics and its biological and chemical formations. No one but you. So you're uniquely created by God. Think about that. That's powerful, all right? But I will explore the whole area of why we're not hearing it, not only from the pulpit, okay, but we're not hearing it clearly from church theologians. They're not grabbing a hold of this. as a theological theme in any kind of deep way. And you would think that that would happen. We're also not hearing it in our faith formation programs. We talk about, okay, we're going to study the book of Revelations, or we're going to study the book of Hebrews, or we're going to study the book of Romans, whatever the case may be, or one of the Gospels, maybe the Gospel of St. Luke or St. Matthew or St. John, which I happen to really like the Gospel of John. We're not going to really get into the depth. The point that I'm trying to make is we need to always refer back to the fact that we are blessed. We are unique. We have been created by God, willed by God from all eternity, really. God knew us. So God knows everything that ever happened in the past, and he knows everything that's going to happen in the future. So he wasn't surprised when you got conceived. Believe me. He went, oh, my goodness, how did that happen? No, that didn't happen that way, okay, at all. So I just want you to know that. But I will talk more about the problems in our clergy and why they're not being more. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't clergy. I've heard some Catholic priests and I've heard some Protestant ministers who really you can really feel guilty after you hear them talk, okay, about abortion. But I would say the vast majority, just like as Eric the Taxis says very consistently, that back in the 1930s, 1940s, the ministers at that time, except for Bonhoeffer, okay, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who really died by losing his head because he really fought for the end of the Holocaust. And he made it well known, and he criticized many of the pastors in those days and priests, I'm sure, for not speaking up more and not condemning Hitler and I think we gotta do that, all right? And that's not happening in the vast majority of our clergy and from our bishops, those churches that have bishops. Okay. And so let me refer back to one of Paul's epistles. It's Ephesians 6:12. And I'm mentioning this because it's important. It's important to the whole message as well. What he says here, and I'm going to quote from the New International Version. I just liked some of the wording in it, and I'll explain that a little bit more. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of this dark world. And this is the most revealing of all, against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. Now, let me break this down a little bit. When it says we're not, the struggle isn't against flesh and blood. Well, independent of the evil spirits, okay? Right. The evil, that's really the source of it. It's not people. People are influenced by those evil spirits. So it's not that we're fighting flesh and blood, material movement, okay? What we're dealing with is an ideology. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of holding this whole idea of who we are in a spiritual sense. And there is an attack. We're in a spiritual battle. Big time spiritual battle. I think part of why maybe the ministers aren't talking more about it, the reason why Christians in general, being they Protestant or Catholic, just oh yeah, I know, yeah, abortion. Well, there might be some times when it's the level of commitment, the level of determination that this is not right and can never be right. Okay, it's an intrinsic evil. Can never be right because it rejects God's creative action. And Satan, that evil spirit, wants to destroy everything God has created. He wants to destroy you by having you sin and reject God. He wants to destroy the senior citizen who is about to die and have him choose suicide instead of dying naturally in the grace of God. And he wants that child that is struggling and maybe in an abusive family, he wants that to really ferment. Turn that kid into a criminal. Give him a gun. See? He wants everything that God created to be destroyed, even our natural environment. He wants everything that God created that's good to be destroyed. And he wants that child in the womb. Absolutely, that child in the womb to be destroyed. Doesn't even want to give it a chance to walk in a journey, a spiritual journey to all eternity. Doesn't want to even give it a chance. That's how crudely we are living. And I think that's why it's important that we understand that our struggle is not again. But there are rulers. There are authorities. There's darkness in our culture, okay, that's perpetuated by people because they've been influenced to follow those evil paths that life takes us down, those twists and turns that I mentioned earlier. Okay, now, you know what? I mean, just think, a culture can be changed, or at least a culture can be really moved into a new direction. Now, maybe we might not get to a point where abortion is completely ended. I mean, I think that has to be our intention. Look at the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his whole movement about discrimination against black people. People used to say that black people were not persons. They weren't really human beings. They were property of their landlords, of their taskmasters. They were subhumans in a white society. People believed that and lived it and supported it. And that's the same thing that's happening with abortion. It's not a person. It's a bunch of cells. No, it's not a bunch of cells. It's DNA doing great things and forming a human being in their mother's womb. A unique person, willed by God. So it's not some clump, but the marketing people have us convinced it's just cells. So we can justify. It's unfortunately where we're at right now. So that's what I want to do. I want to bring this message across loud and clear. But you know what? Just like Dr. King, let me go back to that for a second. That was a very action-driven movement. Okay, racial discrimination. Now, it still exists to some extent today. And that's why I said, you know what? Evil is going to be here to the last day that we're on earth. The last day that there's, before God comes back and cleans the whole thing up. Okay, there's going to be evil even on that day. So I really can't say that, that whether it's discrimination, whether it's abortion, whether it's abuse, whether it's crime and killing people, our pride, our anger, and all that stuff's going to be there on the last day. So, but we can do everything we can to bring it to a close as best that we can. And that's what God wants us to. He wants us to work in his vineyard. I think we have to just acknowledge that we're in a battle, a spiritual battle. Okay. So that really is the message I want to bring out today in this first podcast. I want to mention that we are created in the image and likeness of God. We are willed by God. We are unique, totally unique, like no other person. We've been known by God from all eternity. If you look at in the Bible, Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "Before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you." Think about that. Not when you were conceived in your mother's womb did I find out about you, but before you were formed and before you were conceived, I knew you. That goes for you and me and everyone else that's alive today. So that's why we really have to work at it. But the second episode, I think this is a foundational. Second episode is just like the first one. This is an introduction. But the second one, I'm really going to talk about Paul and his life, his early life. I think it's important that we know that, because I keep on saying I'm the Apostle Paul's messenger. Okay. I'm going to refer to things Paul has said in the past and what I think and believe that he wants said today in the 21st century. And it's going to be very convicting. So the second one is going to be about Paul the Zealot. He was a zealot Jew and he was a zealot Christian in the early Christian era. And I want to talk about what his specific his specific message was. Okay. He talked about a lot of things. Justification. He talked about sin. But the central thing he talked about was the cross. If it wasn't for the crucifixion and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, we would not be anywhere near where we are today as children of God. We would still be in bondage, slaves to Satan. But we're far beyond that. And we have an opportunity to be even further beyond that. Okay. But we have to understand Paul. So the second podcast is going to be about St. Paul. I think the third podcast is going to be about, the Bible and what it says about abortion. I think these are foundational things. If we don't understand these things, if we don't understand the larger context, we're not going to understand why we're even talking about this. What's preceded us in all of this. I hope you got something out of this. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Apostle Paul's messenger, and I hope that I've touched your heart and I've given you something to think about. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to it and hit that bell, okay? It's because YouTube is going to be counting all those bells, and they're going to take me off the air, and you're not going to hear the message. And I'm going to say to God, well, I tried. What you need to help me cooperate. The last thing I want to mention is we talk about involvement. Okay, let me go back a little bit because I missed this in my notes. It's important to know, but it's important to act. Okay, so I know a lot, but I don't need to hold it on to it. I need to use it. So in my community, I'm the president I live in the coastal area of South Carolina, in the Horry and Georgetown counties of South Carolina. And I'm the president in that area, it's called the Grand Strand. Okay. I'm the president of Grand Strand Citizens for Life. Our job is to really educate and to move people along in that direction. But we really need more than just the board of directors. We need people like you, not only in South Carolina, but in every area of the country that you're, or in the world that you live. You might be hearing this in some foreign country. Okay. This goes, find out something about the pro-life organizations in your area and meet the people. And by the way, those people need to be reaching out to you too. So it's just not you finding them. They need to find you. All right. And that's what we need to do here in the Grand Strand as well, is we need to open ourselves up and bring in as many people as we can, of all nationalities, of all races, of all religions, to believe in the sanctity and dignity of the human person. Okay. Now, with regard to those people that live here in the South Carolina area, there is a Facebook page, it's Grand Strand Citizens for Life. Go on it. There's also a website. It's called makethelifechoice.org. Okay. Makethelifechoice.org. That's the website. If you're in the South Carolina area, you're in the Grand Strand area, look that up, or go on Facebook, go on the Grand Strand Citizens for Life website or Facebook page. All right. And get involved. Get in touch with us. There's ways to contact us. You'll find out all that information. In the future, we're going to talk about things like, abortion in the Bible. We're going to talk about science behind human life. We're going to talk about some of the dangers that are happening in today's world, like the abortion bill. That is going to be a major discussion. And we're going to talk about creation. That's the essence of my book, Creation. Thank you. God bless. So thanks for joining me today on Dr. Nick, the Apostle Paul's messenger. I hope this message touches your heart and gives you something to consider. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe so you never miss a conversation, and click that bell. That's important. Okay? And if you found value in today's discussion, please share it with your friends who might need to hear it. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So connect with me by emailing me at drnick.mazza, my last name Mazza, M-A-Z-Z-A, at gmail.com. I'll say that again, drnick.mazza@gmail.com. Send in your questions, and let's keep this conversation moving. Until next time, stay strong in the faith, stand firm in the truth, and remember, you are never alone on this journey. God bless.